I've got a challenging sector really of the afternoon, partly graveyard hour, and also insights into sexual trauma. As Anne just mentioned there, sexual trauma has been very much a part of my own life through a number of years of being sexually abused and the effects of that. And my becoming aware of that, similar to what Lara's just been saying, through prayer, of the realities of that coming forth, and really part of my own journey with the Lord, and show me also what it's like to walk alongside other people. So I don't just share with you out of a textbook today, but out of my own, very much my lived experience, and a very often messy experience, an unpleasant experience that, let me tell you, really does smell of the sheep's pen. What constitutes sexual trauma? Just very quickly, in case you're wondering what that might look like. Well, it's any sexual boundary violation at all, at an inappropriate age and in an inappropriate setting. That could be, we know perfectly well, infancy, childhood, teen years. It could be something in adulthood. It's something we're learning more and more today does exist within the workplace. But actually, it's something we're increasingly seeing among people's friendships. It's also something that happens very much in relationships, courting relationships, and sad to say, it's something that also happens there within marriage itself. It could be, we know, incest, sexual abuse, forced sexual behavior, rape, pornography. Even our advertising today has reached a point in places where it's actually sexually traumatic for many people to have to deal with, and particularly for our children themselves. Sexual trauma can be direct. It can also be indirect in a very sort of implicit way, which doesn't seem at first to be startling. And generally we see it as something that's uninvited into somebody's life. But the other aspect to be very much aware of, and we're seeing an increase in this today as well, sometimes it is being invited and people aren't aware that they're actually inviting trauma into their own lives. And the more trauma somebody experiences, and that becomes their common experience, the more they become a victim, therefore, of trauma as well. Just very quickly, what are some of the symptoms? Because if many of you are dealing with married couples, sometimes these different issues might well rise. And sometimes we sit and think, oh, well, maybe it's just somebody's problem, it's something that's going on. But I wonder how often we turn and say, what is the underlying issue that might be here? Could there be an issue of sexual trauma that's going on in somebody's life? So, for example, if you find a partner within a marriage or even in a relationship that's withdrawing or finding that they're mistrusting other people suddenly, it could well be that there's a deeper issue that's beginning to rise. Well, there's always a deeper issue, but that deeper issue could be sexual trauma. Clearly, suicidality would make sense. Difficulty relating to others except in sexual or seductive ways. That's always a telltale sign. Unusual interest in or avoidance of all things sexual or physical. It's not that somebody's trying to be difficult, but often there's a deeper issue that's beginning to rise. Sleep problems, nightmares, phobias, even the fear of going to bed. For some people, it's because what's happening is the mind begins to settle and some of the traumas might well begin to start rising. Frequent accidents or self-injurious behaviors. I think some of these are pretty obvious, but it's just a reminder today what some of these symptoms might look like. Secretiveness or an unusual aggressiveness. A few more for you. I'm just going to go through the bold ones because of time. Sexual components to drawing or games. Some people today are very much drawn towards gaming. And there's a certain type of gaming. And I speak about this not just for married couples, but also becoming very, very aware of where our young people are at today. Because many of them are actually beginning to be drawn into sexually traumatized areas, which is deeply affecting the family, and therefore it's putting a stress on the marriage of mum and dad, and it's being aware of those things too. Neurotic reactions, habit disorders, unusual sexual knowledge or behavior. Of course, today we live in such an eroticized society that to some extent we're so used to hearing things that we fail to have that sixth sense to say, hang on a minute, that really is an inappropriate thing for that person to be saying. Or somebody's repeating that just a little bit too often. Prostitution makes sense, forcing sexual acts on children, an extreme fear of being touched. Now, admittedly, we've lost a lot of boundaries today, and if you know me well, I'm a hugger. I just love, I like giving them, I like receiving them. But it's also being very, very sensitive to where people are at. And sometimes people are incredibly sensitive about the whole area of touch. And there may be a very strict telltale sign in there for us to be aware of, or an unwillingness to submit to physical examination. I'm aware today as well, looking at some of these insights into sexual trauma, that we've got a whole new onset of new traumas that are beginning to rise around us. Back in 2008, there was something called the Karta Principles, which were created. These are 29 principles that basically looks really at the eroticization of our society across the board, and basically an embracing of anything. I think one thing that Mother Church is sometimes a little bit slow to do is to be really aware of what is coming around the corner. You know, often we're sort of trying to catch up all the time. And I think, you know, because we have a clear understanding and a sense of our identity, particularly as Christians within the Catholic context, I think we also have a duty to be able to be aware of what might be around the corner as well, that we can pay attention to. I know that across Europe, there's a sort of a construction of something called, they're being referred to as the anti-discrimination police. Basically, if things aren't engaged and embraced in this sort of eroticized world that we're dealing with today, then, you know, in a sense, they're saying anything and everything can take place. We're seeing this with the whole safe schools projection of stuff is saying, you know, people should be allowed to do what they want to be able to do. We're seeing a rise of sexual orientations. It used to be that men like women and women like men, and then we suddenly got the homosexual and the bisexual stuff, and then we got the transsexual stuff. I'm going to come on and break open these three things very quickly in a second or two. Whole area of genders, we're aware of that. Gender pronouns. The Safe Schools Coalition, which I'm sure you all know about. And I can spell the word marriage, but I think we should call it what it really is. Because the more we say same-sex marriage, people believe it exists. And I'm sorry, but it's a lie at the core. So these are some new traumas that we also need to be very aware of and to be able to respond to. And I want to show you in a little while where I think and how the church can actually respond to them as well. Just to say, this is last month I took this off the internet. This is an orientation master list. So basically we're being told that there's now 70 different types of sexual orientation. Now remember we had straight, then we had sort of, straight gay, and then straight gay, bi, trans, whatever. Now we're looking at 70 different types. This is why this topic is really, really important to us, and this is going to deeply, deeply affect the family. They say there are 6 types of attraction, so you can take any type of orientation and put it with a different type of attraction. So 670s, what's that, 560? Different types of sexual orientation. I'm sorry to go there, but yep. Gender master list. Seen one recently that says there's 112 different types of gender. Somebody else said there's 340, which is almost one for every day of the year for our children to go and experiment if they're confused with who they are. They may need to go through that list. And what happens is you end up being shamed by each different variety of thing that you try that is moving more and more away from your truest identity as to who God has created you to be. I've just given you the top 4 just there as well. Come on, clicker. There's the pronoun list. At the moment, we have he, she. Oopsie-daisy. We have he, she, and they. This new list has been created, so you could end up having 54 different ones to choose from. If you get some of these pronouns wrong on a regular basis in New York, you could be fined up to $250,000, or you could be in prison for up to 2 years in Canada. What might recovery look like in a setting that has these new traumas coming while we're still trying to deal with some of the present traumas? Well, I agree very much with what the speakers were saying this morning. First of all, this is a long, slow, drawn-out process. And it's a process of nurturing. Because it goes back to the fact that wherever there's sexual trauma, there's been a breakdown in primary relationships. The very fact that it is so traumatic is because a primary relationship's been broken down. And therefore, I want to echo again what Pope Francis is saying in Amoris Laetitia, and that Archbishop Coleridge broke open for us today. We need to be able to learn to accompany people. That means daring to go alongside them and walking with them. It means listening. If you've heard me speak before, I often repeat the fact that when I listen to somebody's story once, I say to them, I'm looking forward to hearing your story another 31 times. And they look at me like I'm mad. I said, no, every time you tell your story, I get another piece of the jigsaw. I get another piece of understanding the trauma you've been through. Because it takes time for trauma to be able to really rise. Are we willing to go in for the long haul and to listen to somebody? And to be discerning with them, helping them to discern, for them to make the choices for their own lives. And also, in some cases, though, to also be decisive alongside them as well. The story is different for every person. What's happened is their understanding of true love and their understanding of healthy boundaries has been obliterated. And therefore, we need to think, what's that like? What does it mean to truly love, not just normally, but to truly love someone who's got an actual totally shattered understanding of what true love really is? So it's going to require the boldest of love, and it's also going to require patient consistency. We have to learn to be God in the flesh in the midst of the messy and the unpleasant, Mark Collery said today. To expect triggers, flashbacks, that people will look for self-soothing. If you've been traumatized, you try and heal it yourself. And then when you come to the realization this isn't working, then you begin to have to turn again. But you want others to turn too, as well as a God who will be there to receive you as well. And therefore, the bottom line is we're trying to help people amidst their sexual trauma to reconnect with their body and with the real world, and actually with their feelings. And that means we mustn't be afraid of sadness or anger or fear or joy or guilt or shame. What's the role of the church in recovery? And I'm coming into land, don't you worry. We've learned a lot from the 12 steps in recent years. The first step is, I am literally powerless and I need an eternal strength beyond myself. The 12 steps we're seeing are there for just about every single topic going. 12 steps encourage chastity. They help people to manage the shame, but they don't eliminate it. The first thing is it brings them to a place where they can begin to listen and to discern. The second area is we need to be able to provide ongoing spaces where people can really deal with their shame. The cross itself is the place where I've seen people deal with their shame. It's the place I have to keep going to with my shame as a work in progress. We don't talk enough about the freedom that we find through the confessional. We haven't talked about the difficulties of marriage and the joys of marriage. I wish more people would speak about that, the reality of marriage, but also about the freedom found through the confessional. To be able to speak into people's relational wounding, we need to be able to offer them a temporal and an eternal solution. That means we need to be able to break open to them the fact that they have a forever daddy, that God our Father is constantly waiting there for them, that he is holy and he will call them back into holiness. We have a Holy Father as well in the Pope himself, who is there in a pastoral way directing us. Bishops, priests, general dads, single men can be fatherly and can be loving to help people be restored from sexual trauma. Then there's the maternal side, Mother Church, Mother Mary, religious sisters, and mothers themselves. I tell you, for 3 years of my life, I ended up moving in with a married couple, and they were incredibly and profoundly significant in part of my restoration journey. They took me into their home. The place was quite a tip, and they just loved me. I didn't care what the state of the home was. I just wanted to connect with their hearts. And they mothered me and they fathered me and they pointed me to my forever father and my forever mother as well. The communion of saints, past and present. I wish we talked more about the lives of the saints as we used to, because they speak about the sufferings of life, but also the fact there is joy as well. But then with God, nothing is wasted. An unconditional, ever merciful acceptance. That's why this year of mercy is so important. And one of my last slides here, just to let Anne know, 53 seconds to go. We have to learn to listen afresh to the voice of the Holy Spirit. We also need to gain a deeper understanding of the healing ministry and what deliverance ministry looks like as well. These are the places where I see people getting well. I mean, really begin to make significant strides in their recovery journey. We need to have a shared table. Eucharistic table could be the table at home. It's about learning to honor the fact that the bedroom, in a sense, we have the cloth over the altar. At church, we have the cloth over the dining table, but we also have the cloth in a sense. The bed sheets the bed itself is an altar as well. And if we learn to respect all those three places, then what happens is we begin to bring about a whole different witness. I'm not asking you to share your bed with other people apart from your spouse. You understand that? I'm going to ignore the protest about marriage. You can ask me later. At the end of the day, what happens in sexual trauma is you end up with people, thank you very much, there's a temporal flesh of sex, but we need to be able to offer them the eternal flesh of Christ himself. Unless you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, you will not have life within you. Depraved nudity versus the dignified nudity of the crucifix itself. Jesus there takes on all our shame. Iconography. People in pornography are looking for the visual. Iconography is the antithesis of that. We need to be able to talk more about that and break it open. Disconnect of people in their bodies. We need to offer them daily affirmation, attention, and affection. I know it's 15 minutes. Where people have been cursed by the world, they need to learn to be blessed by the church. And my final point is we need to look at this in a very specialized way. But we're not to make out that we're special in any way whatsoever. The church and we as the body of Christ need to be a place where people can come out in every sense of the word and be honest about the trauma they've been through or the challenges they're finding around their sexuality. So I hope I've given you a little bit of food for thought there, and maybe you've got some questions later on. Thank you very much indeed.